Welcome to the debate. Today we are diving into, one of the most intellectually compelling questions in the history of human thought. How do we actually categorize Buddhism? Is it, at its heart, the world's most successful non-theistic philosophy? A practical technology for the mind focused entirely on self-improvement through empirical observation, or, despite rejecting a creator God and any kind of mandatory dogma, does its systematic pursuit of ultimate liberation, does that definitively cement its status as a profound spiritual path, a religion in function, if not in form?
And that tension is really the core of it. It's often summed up as a religion that is not a religion, which, it really challenges the very definitions we use for faith, for belief, and for metaphysics. It forces us to ask, what is the core function of religion? Is it belief in a deity, or is it the systematic process of seeking transcendence from the fundamental conditions of suffering?
I'm going to maintain that Buddhism is primarily a philosophical framework, is rooted in self-sovereignty and direct experience. I see it as a kind of reality-based psychology that was developed, 2,500 years ago?
And I'll be arguing that its structured methodology for achieving nirvana, which is an ultimate non-temporal state, and its comprehensive ethical requirements, that all of this aligns so perfectly with humanity's deep search for salvation that it fulfills the essential spiritual role of religion, regardless of its cosmology.
Okay, so let's start with a quick executive summary of this whole paradox. When we think about a traditional religion, we typically look for, fixed dogma, mandatory rituals, and of course, adherence to some kind of supreme, omnipotent being. This is the mold that Buddhism just instantly breaks. The Buddha offered no eternal salvation, no heaven of endless happiness. He never claimed to be a divine messenger. Instead, he presented a diagnosis and a method. The whole pursuit is internal, discovering truth, overcoming suffering, and living a deeply mindful life. And this radical, non-supernatural foundation is what makes categorization so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and that emphasis on non-supernaturalism is its brilliance. It's exactly why it appeals to so many modern rational minds. The core principle is empirical verification. It's not believe these teachings, it's experience them until you verify their truth for yourself. Truth isn't transmitted through some sacred text or by a clerical authority. It's achieved through, real-world, deep understanding gained through practice. This makes the path profoundly experiential.
Exactly. It's fundamentally experimental. The Buddha's invitation was, in effect, look, don't take my word for it. Conduct the experiment yourself. This is precisely why I call it a technology for the mind. It gives the practitioner complete internal control.
Okay, but let's just pause on that word control. Because while the mechanism is internal, the goal is still an ultimate transcendent state. And that, to me, suggests a spiritual framework. The fact that the mechanism for this profound internal freedom is dependent solely on the practitioner's own efforts, that doesn't reduce its status as a spiritual path. It just makes it a highly sophisticated, non-theistic one. It offers liberation, which is, that's the foundational promise of virtually every major world faith.
All right, so to really understand the mechanism, we have to ground the philosophy in its core structure. The Four Noble Truths. Think of it as a medical model for the existential condition. So the first truth is the diagnosis, suffering, or dukkha. And we often translate this as just, pain, but it's so much deeper. It's this chronic dissatisfaction, this gnawing anxiety that results from the fundamental instability of existence.
This realization of constant impermanence. And that realization that everything changes, that every joy is fleeting, that is the very catalyst that pushes the practice beyond simple self-help. The moment you truly internalize impermanence, the stakes become existential.
Correct. So the system is prescriptive. Suffering ends when its root cause, which is craving, or tam-I, is abandoned. That's the third noble truth, the cessation, or diet, which logically leads to nirvana, to absolute peace. The roadmap to actually achieve this is the Eightfold Path, and these are practical, ethical instructions, Right understanding, right speech, right mindfulness. It's a systematic guide for navigating reality, not a set of required acts of worship.
Right, and when we consider the Buddha's rejection of a deity, we have to see it not as some kind of scientific dismissal, but as a conceptual choice that actually supports that internal roadmap. The Buddha, he recognized that the concept of an almighty creator often functions as a spiritual shelter. It's a place to hide from the fear of death and the anxiety of life's lack of absolute control.
It's a profound psychological observation.
It is. By eliminating that external safety net, he forces the seeker to rely entirely on the path itself. He identified the desire for external salvation, the eternal safety provided by a creator, as just another fundamental form of craving. If you're craving heaven, you're still bound by desire. And that is a radical reframing of humanity's existential dilemma.
And this redirection inward is completely inseparable from the concept of non-self, or anatta. This is perhaps the most radical philosophical break from traditional systems that promise some kind of immortal soul.
Anatta is the great equalizer. The teaching is that existence is not an independent, permanent entity. The idea of a stable, unified self, the kaito, is merely a construct. It's a mental product sustained by attachment. And this realization, it demands an experiential acceptance of constant change, which is, it's profoundly unsettling, but it's absolutely necessary for liberation.
So if we accept that the self is an illusion, the purpose of the practice then becomes the restructuring of our cognitive habits, which allows us to interact with reality without the burden of ego. This is exactly why I call it philosophy. It's cognitive engineering.
I see the power of your framework, cognitive engineering, to dismantle the ego. I like that. But let's turn back to the ultimate prize, Nirvana. If the path is purely empirical, purely psychological, why is the destination described as an ultimate state of absolute peace, a complete cessation of all suffering, beyond all mental and physical constraints?
I'm not totally convinced by that line of reasoning, because calling it transcendent implies a destination outside the bounds of observable reality, or maybe a merger with some divine substance. I would argue that nirvana is the ultimate realization of reality as it is, impermanent, interconnected, and free from the mental conditioning of craving. It's not escaping reality. It's finally seeing it clearly.
But to achieve that level of peace, the cessation of the cycle of anxiety and rebirth, that is an ultimate spiritual achievement. The sheer scope of the ambition, the complete unbinding, it elevates the practice. A philosophy helps you live better. A spiritual path helps you exit the confines of conditioned existence entirely. And that right there is the promise of nirvana. The goal isn't just resilience. The goal is ultimate freedom from the human condition itself.
Okay, then let's look at the engine of suffering again. Craving. You noted the craving is like a bottomless vessel, driving endless anxiety. And traditional religions, they often manage this by promising gratification in a future state. Endure now, enjoy later. Buddhism demands the cessation of craving now.
Exactly. And that immediate demand for cessation is a profound act of spiritual discipline. It says, you must sacrifice the most fundamental impulse of the ego, the desire for more, in this very moment.
That's an interesting point, though. I think I would frame it differently. The crucial insight isn't the sacrifice of craving. It's the understanding that you don't need to chase it for happiness. The liberation is internal control, not some external reward or total asceticism. Consider the example of someone like Warren Buffett. Here's a person who possesses immense material wealth, operates a vast economic empire, yet he lives simply, mindfully, and practices immense organized charity. He hasn't rejected external reality or wealth, but he is demonstrably not controlled by the craving for them.
I wonder if that's really a one-to-one comparison, though. Is that a fair example?
I think it is. His actions prove that liberation is the release from the internal mental control imposed by pamai, by craving. It demonstrates that the solution is a psychological decoupling. The practice allows you to engage with the world, even massive wealth, without being bound by the craving for it or the fear of losing it. It's freedom from an internal tyranny, which is purely psychological.
But when that psychological decoupling leads to a highly ethical, simple, non-harming life, It ceases to be mere self-help and becomes a rigorous ethical framework leading to a kind of internal sanctity. The Eightfold Path isn't just about reducing stress. It's about right livelihood and right action. When you integrate that comprehensive ethical code with the pursuit of ultimate peace, it takes on the characteristics of spiritual duty. And that is the definition of a successful faith system.
Well, let's look at the practice itself, mindfulness and meditation. Today, these are universally adopted secular tools for reducing stress, improving focus, achieving balance. I would argue that meditation is not a solemn ritual. It's an attitude of observing the mind and breath to prevent being hijacked by negative emotions. It's a highly effective empirical technique.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the full intent behind the path? While observing the breath is, yes, a practical technique, the ultimate intent of the entire Eightfold Path is to reach awakening. And this goes fundamentally beyond simple stress reduction or mental health. It is a systematic, structured methodology designed to achieve ultimate freedom from the cycle of suffering and rebirth, which, that has been the singular, foundational aim of every profound spiritual doctrine throughout human history.
But the liberation is self-created. It is not mediated by clergy or granted by some external grace. That distinction is fundamental to its categorization as a non-religious philosophy.
Yes, yet the systematic, formalized process toward achieving a non-temporal, ultimate perfect state is precisely what defines a profound spiritual system. The lack of an omnipotent God is a detail of cosmology, not a negation of its spiritual function in offering ultimate salvation from the conditions of existence.
Ultimately, I think Buddhism offers a profound path to freedom that is rooted in self-reliance and internal wisdom, not an external authority or divine promise. It challenges us to look within and abandon the mental habits that create our own pain. This makes its tools highly relevant to navigating modern societal pressures, consumerism, and this relentless cultural obsession with comparison. It is, at its core, a radical, compassionate, ethical psychology.
And I would affirm the deep wisdom that happiness is not found in some future promise, but in accepting the present moment as it is. The ultimate freedom isn't the absence of craving, but the ability to not be bound by it. That release from existential bondage, achieved through a systematic moral and mental effort toward a goal of ultimate peace, that is why it functions as perhaps the most profound spiritual system humanity has ever devised.
So whether one ultimately views it as a philosophy, a psychology, or a religion, the enduring power of the teachings really lies in its radical invitation.
It asks us to experience and verify the truth for oneself. The ultimate test remains the same as it always has: come and see. The exploration continues.